A simple-looking woman was escorted to a cramped waiting area in the airport's economy section. Airport staff had decided she looked too poor to be a legitimate traveler. That was their first mistake. Because less than a day later, her billionaire husband came with a private jet, leaving everyone who humiliated her utterly speechless. A woman with a simple look stepped into Gate B32 of the city's largest international airport. And from that moment on, everything she experienced was a slow spiral of disbelief and humiliation. Because you see, she didn't look like she belonged in a bustling terminal full of professionals with polished shoes, fancy roller bags, or first-class lounge invitations. Her clothes were plain, her hair tied back, and her luggage a scuffed, decades-old suitcase. She wore a faded gray cardigan over a white t-shirt, comfortable jeans, and a pair of canvas sneakers that might have once been fashionable, but now just looked worn. She was the kind of traveler you'd expect to find sitting quietly, sipping cheap coffee in some cramped waiting area. No one really paid her any mind at first. In fact, that was partly the issue. She was invisible. When she tried asking a passing flight attendant about an upgrade possibility, she'd been hoping to surprise her husband by flying business class for once. She was brushed off with a curt shake of the head. No big deal, she thought. She really only wanted to inquire, see if there was a chance. If not, economy seating would be fine. She took a breath and found a chair near the corner, hugging her purse to her lap. Her name was Harper. She felt an odd sense of calm as she looked at the crowd of travelers streaming by. But the calm didn't last. It was about an hour before boarding time when the trouble really began. A stern-looking TSA officer did a random sweep of the seating areas, checking for suspicious persons or items. He paused the moment he saw Harper, eyes flicking over her attire. She offered a smile, nervous but friendly. He was having none of it. "Ma'am," he said, voice echoing in the high-ceilinged terminal. "Can I see your ID and boarding pass?" Harper nodded and handed them over, not wanting any trouble. The officer studied her documents a bit too long, flipping them front to back. She was traveling alone, no family members in sight, and her name on the ticket was simply Harper Cook. She wasn't with a business group. She didn't have fancy tags on her luggage. She seemed like nobody special. "Where are you flying today?" he asked. "Vancouver," Harper answered, swallowing. "For a short trip?" His gaze strayed to the minimal pieces of luggage at her feet. "And what's your reason for travel?" She blinked, not sure why he was so intense. "Personal visit?" she replied. "Just a short stay." He didn't like that answer, apparently. "Who are you visiting?" "I'm meeting my husband there." "Where's your husband now?" She shifted uncomfortably. "He's not with me at the moment. He's traveling separately." The officer stared at her face, then at her ID. "Wait here," he barked, stepping aside to speak quietly into a walkie-talkie. Harper caught a few words. "Possible concern. Look into it, that kind of thing." Her stomach twisted, but she tried to stay calm. There must be a misunderstanding. She'd traveled before, never had any trouble. But maybe the officer found something suspicious about her battered passport, or the fact that her clothes looked too plain. She wasn't sure. Soon, a second officer joined him. They conferred, glancing at Harper now and then. She forced a polite smile, but the anxiety gnawed at her. When they returned, they asked her to follow them, making it clear she had no real choice. And that was how she ended up being temporarily quarantined, as they called it, in a curtained-off section near the end of the terminal, an area usually used for extra security checks or travelers who set off some sort of red flag on the system. She tried to explain that she had nothing to hide, that she was simply waiting for her flight in economy. But the officer's skepticism only hardened. They had her sit in a cramped metal chair at a plain table with her suitcase beside it. For the next hour, she was peppered with questions, her bag rummaged through, and all the while, passers-by, airport staff, other travelers, slowed down to gawk at her through the gap in the curtains as if she was some sort of criminal. She never raised her voice, never lost her temper. She gave calm, direct answers. But inside, she felt her dignity being chipped away. The airport staff had labeled her as suspicious purely based on her appearance, and there seemed little she could do to change their minds. A supervisor came by at one point, a woman named Cheryl, according to her badge, and looked Harper up and down with barely veiled contempt. "Ma'am," Cheryl said, "we have reason to believe your trip might not be as straightforward as you claim. Are you carrying any large amounts of cash, illegal substances, anything to declare?" Harper's cheeks flamed. "No, I promise. I'm just going to Vancouver for a personal trip." Cheryl eyed Harper's worn cardigan and scuffed sneakers like they were evidence of wrongdoing. "We'll see," she said. Then, turning to a subordinate, "Log her details into the system. Keep her here until we verify everything." That subordinate, a younger man with a bored expression, nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He glanced at Harper with something like pity, but not enough to do anything about it. Time crawled. Harper couldn't help but notice other travelers who looked far more dubious were breezing through the terminal without so much as a second glance. Meanwhile, she sat in that bleak waiting area under the harsh fluorescent lights, answering the same questions again and again. They insisted on calling it a routine check, yet it felt like targeted harassment. She had no fancy watch, no jewelry. Maybe that made them suspect she was up to something else. Or maybe it was the way she carried herself, timid and unassuming. She didn't have the polished confidence of the business travelers swirling through. While Harper sat there, she overheard snatches of conversation from beyond the curtain. A ground staff member joked to another, "We got some lady in there who probably can't even afford a cab ride, let alone a flight." The other laughed. "Bet she's pulling something shady. Did you see that suitcase? Ancient. She must have swiped a ticket or something." Their voices dropped, but she caught enough to feel a sting in her eyes. She blinked fast to keep tears at bay, but that was far from the worst. About 2 hours later, a new pair of officials showed up to recheck her story. One of them, a tall man with a badge that read Officer Briggs, took an immediate disliking to her. He demanded to see all her credit cards, asked her to explain how she paid for her ticket, quizzed her on her job history. Even after she calmly explained that she was a freelance artist who did commissions online, he looked unconvinced. "You're telling me you make enough as a freelance painter to afford a flight to Vancouver?" Briggs said with a sneer. "You got bank statements to prove that?" Harper's voice wobbled despite her efforts to stay strong. "I have some savings. Also, my husband helps sometimes. He's financially secure." Briggs and his partner exchanged a glance. "And where is this husband of yours exactly?" She hesitated. "He's meeting me there." "Sounds fishy," Briggs muttered. "For all we know, you could be involved in smuggling." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Do you have any idea how many people try to lie their way into this airport with fake tickets, stolen credit cards, all sorts of scams? You fit the profile. A nobody with no visible means of support." She wanted to protest, but her tongue felt heavy. "I'm not a nobody," she finally managed. "I'm just—" She stopped, knowing any word might be twisted. And calling her husband billionaire or extremely wealthy would sound like some fantasy story she'd just concocted to save herself. Would they even believe her? Briggs rolled his eyes. "We'll see about that. We'll run your name through the system again. Don't move." With that, he strode out, leaving her alone with his silent partner. She slumped in the chair. Her flight was supposed to leave soon. She felt the creeping dread that she'd miss it altogether. But every time she tried to explain her timeline, they told her to sit down and wait. She was effectively stuck, with no one to call. Her phone battery was dying. She considered calling her husband, but he was often unreachable during certain hours. Besides, she wasn't even sure how that conversation would go. "Hi, dear. I'm in airport detention. Could you magically fix this? Sounded absurd. Yet, ironically, that might have been her quickest way out of this mess. Eventually, a female staffer in a crisp uniform, her name tag read Evie, entered the curtained space. At first, Harper felt a brief spark of hope that maybe this woman was more sympathetic. But Evie's expression was cold, her posture rigid. "Follow me," Evie said. "We're moving you to a separate waiting area. The flight to Vancouver is boarding soon, but you're not cleared to go. You'll wait until we resolve this." Harper's stomach clenched. She gathered her suitcase and her purse, struggling to keep her composure, and followed Evie through the corridor. People stared as she was escorted out. She heard snickering from a couple of ground staff. A security guard gave her a once-over that dripped with disapproval. She could almost hear them thinking, "Yep, that lady definitely doesn't belong." They ended up in a disused lounge area that was typically reserved for delayed passenger overflow. The place smelled of stale coffee. The chairs were old, the walls a drab beige. Evie indicated a seat near the back. "Sit. Don't leave until someone comes for you." Harper lowered herself onto the seat, hugging her purse, eyes flicking around the near-empty lounge. Apart from an older woman with a crying toddler, she was alone. The woman gave her a sympathetic look, but Harper was too drained to respond. She could feel the sting of tears in her eyes again. She tried to think of how she'd gotten here. Just a normal trip, a normal flight. This was insane. Time ticked by in agonizing slowness. She wondered if the plane had already taken off. She pictured the flight crew giving final announcements to the comfortably seated passengers. She imagined the overhead bins shutting, the engines powering up, while she languished in some god-forsaken lounge. She considered sneaking away, but that would probably result in immediate arrest by the overzealous TSA. So she stayed, silent tears finally slipping down her cheeks. That's when the door to the lounge swung open again, and two employees stepped in. A slender man with a fussy expression and a woman wearing an official airport ID lanyard. They marched straight up to Harper. "You're Ms. Harper Cook?" the man asked, voice dripping with condescension. Harper wiped her cheeks, clearing her throat. "Yes." He tapped at a tablet in his hand. "Right. We need you to come with us, please." She felt a flicker of hope that maybe they'd realized their mistake, that she was free to go. Gathering her things, she rose. Is there a problem?" The man's lip curled. "We have a complaint that you were being unruly at the security checkpoint." "What?" Harper's eyes went wide. "That's not true at all." His tone was dismissive. "Well, we need to verify your story. Let's move." Her shoulders slumped. She had no fight left in her. She trailed after them out of the lounge, down a hallway, past large windows that overlooked the runway. The day had turned gray and overcast. Outside, planes taxied on the tarmac, oblivious to the drama inside. They ended up in a small office with harsh lighting and posters about prohibited items on the walls. The female employee told Harper to set her purse on the desk, then sign some forms. Harper complied, feeling like she was stuck in an episode of some bizarre reality show. "Why is this happening?" Harper asked softly, after signing the forms. "I haven't broken any law." The man with the tablet shrugged. "We have reports from staff that you were loitering in suspicious areas. TSA found your answers inconsistent. Then you apparently made a scene at the gate." He looked at her disapprovingly. "We take these allegations seriously." She stared at him in disbelief. "I never made a scene. I just asked a few questions about my flight. That's all." He sighed, tapping his foot. "Ma'am, the flight you were supposed to be on has departed. You'll need to either purchase another ticket or—" Tears welled up in her eyes again. "But they never let me go to the gate. They said I had to stay. I didn't do anything wrong." The woman employee, arms folded, shook her head. "Maybe you should plan your travel better next time." "Plan better?" Harper thought. She had planned. She had arrived at the airport hours early, but she was so beaten down by the entire ordeal that she just pressed her lips together and nodded, though her heart pounded with frustration and sorrow. "Since your flight is gone," the man with the tablet continued, "you'll have to make arrangements for another flight. We can release you now, but we advise you to leave the secure area if you're not booking a new ticket. Understood?" Release her now? As if she'd been in custody? She felt a flash of anger, but also relief. At least she wouldn't be stuck in that lounge forever, or grilled by more suspicious TSA officers. She mustered a shaky nod. "Yes, okay." They escorted her back toward the public side of the terminal. She wondered if this was what it felt like to be forcibly ejected from a place you had every right to be. Perhaps it was. The sliding doors to the main concourse opened, and she stepped out into the swirl of travelers. People hurried by with rolling suitcases. Couples lined up at check-in counters. Life went on, utterly indifferent to her plight. She stumbled over to an empty bench, sank onto it, and pressed a hand to her temple. She had to figure out how to get to Vancouver. Her phone was about to die, but she powered it on long enough to see missed calls from her husband, Adam Cook. She felt a pang. He must be worried. They were planning to meet at a hotel near Vancouver's harbor. She tried calling him back, but the phone died mid-ring. She cursed under her breath. She considered buying a new flight right away. But her credit card was almost at its limit. She had savings, but a lot of it was tied up in their joint account. An account she usually avoided touching. She could call Adam from a payphone or something. But wait, did airports even have payphones anymore? She might have to find an electronics store to buy a charger. Her mind reeled with next steps, all overshadowed by the gnawing sense of utter humiliation. Just then, she felt a presence at her elbow. She looked up to see a man wearing a neat black blazer, an earpiece coiled behind his ear. He had the aura of private security or possibly a corporate aide. He studied her face, gave a polite bow, and said, "Ms. Cook?" She frowned. "Yes?" Her voice was hoarse. He gave a small smile. "Apologies for the intrusion, but your husband asked me to find you. My name is Thomas. I work for him." Harper blinked rapidly. "Wait, you work for Adam?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He's waiting just outside. Please allow me to escort you." Her heart fluttered. Adam had come here in person? She stood, barely registering that her legs felt shaky. Thomas led her through the corridor and out the main exit doors near the arrival section. Cool air hit her face. The smell of car exhaust and late afternoon drizzle greeted her. And then there he was, Adam Cook, leaning against a sleek black SUV. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored shirt that looked more like something an executive would wear than a casual traveler. His hair was a warm chestnut color with a slight wave, and his hazel eyes lit up in relief as soon as he spotted her. He pushed off the car and rushed toward her. "Harper," he breathed, pulling her into his arms. She let out a strangled sob of both relief and pent-up tension. He stroked her hair. "I was worried sick. You weren't answering your phone. The hotel said you never checked in. I hopped onto the next flight I could get to come back here." She couldn't form coherent words, so she just clung to him. After a moment, she managed to choke out, They wouldn't let me get on the plane. They thought I was suspicious or something. I missed the flight. They treated me like a criminal." Adam's jaw tightened.
"What? That's ridiculous. You have every right to fly."
He turned to Thomas with a sharp edge in his voice. "Get me the details. I want the names of the people responsible." Thomas inclined his head. "Yes, sir. We already have partial information from some employees I spoke with inside. We can certainly gather more." Adam guided Harper to the SUV, helping her into the passenger seat. He joined her, and Thomas took the driver's position. As they pulled away from the curb, Harper finally caught her breath enough to ask, How did you know to come?"
"I called your phone. Got no answer,"
Adam explained, voice tight.
"I tried calling the airline. They said you'd been flagged or something. I flew back here as fast as I could. I was planning to find you no matter what.
She studied his face. Adam Cook was calm, usually. He ran a private investment firm, quietly amassing a fortune that not many people knew about. He wasn't flashy, which suited Harper well. She'd fallen in love with the man behind the money. But now, seeing him shift into protective mode, it occurred to her just how much weight he could throw around if needed. "You must be so tired," she murmured, noticing the fine lines of stress around his eyes. He shook his head. "Don't worry about me. Just tell me everything that happened." So she told him. She told him about the suspicion, the sneers, the extended interrogation, the missed flight, and how no one believed she had a valid reason to travel. By the time she finished recounting the ordeal, her eyes stung again. Adam's expression hardened. "That's absolutely unacceptable," he said. "Nobody should be treated that way, let alone my wife. The minute we get somewhere quiet, I'm going to call the airport authorities." She sniffled, then tried to smile. "I don't want to cause trouble." He set a hand gently on her knee. "It's not trouble. It's justice. You were humiliated for no good reason." Then he paused, glancing out the window at the airport receding behind them. "Besides, we need to get to Vancouver, right? So let's do it our way." "Our way?" she echoed. He offered a small grin that carried a hint of mischief. "There's a reason Thomas is here with me. The firm owns a private jet. We'll use it. We'll take you to Vancouver ourselves." She blinked rapidly. A private jet? But that's so extravagant." His eyes softened. "Harper, I want to make sure you travel safely and comfortably, especially after what you've been through. Let's just say you've earned it." She chewed her lip, uncertain. She'd never flown on Adam's private plane. He'd mentioned it once, but she always insisted on traveling the normal way. She didn't want to seem out of touch or reliant on extravagance. But after everything that had just happened, the thought of skipping lines, skipping the sneers of gate agents, skipping the suspicion of TSA, it sounded like a dream. She let out a shaky exhale. "All right," she finally said. Adam gave her hand a supportive squeeze.
"Good. Then let's do it."
Thomas drove them to a smaller, specialized terminal on the far side of the airport, where private jets and charter planes were serviced. It was part of the same airport complex, but a different world entirely. Gone were the crowded check-in counters and bright neon signs for baggage claims. Instead, they pulled up to a sleek building marked Executive Aviation, where a uniformed attendant rushed out to open the door. The drizzle had turned into a light rain, but that attendant held an umbrella high, ushering them in with a friendly smile. Harper was awed by how simple the process was. She barely noticed the discreet security checkpoint. The staff recognized Adam on sight, addressing him as Mr. Cook with subdued deference. Soon, they were led across a short walkway to a gleaming white private jet that sat waiting, engines humming quietly. She tried not to stare open-mouthed, but it was difficult. She had never imagined she'd actually step onto something like this. Inside, the jet's cabin was all plush leather seats, polished wood paneling, and ambient lighting that exuded calm. The flight attendant, a poised woman named Carla, greeted them warmly, offering drinks or snacks. Harper sank into one of the seats, her heart thumping from the surreal shift. One moment, she was essentially being detained. The next, she was on a private plane bound for Vancouver. Adam took the seat across from her, leaning forward. "All right, we'll be airborne soon. Is there anything you need?" She shook her head, trying not to cry again from sheer relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Just thank you." He looked pained that she'd even feel the need to thank him. "Harper, of course. I just wish I'd known sooner." The pilot's voice came over a small speaker, announcing their imminent departure. Moments later, the jet taxied away from the executive terminal and onto a separate runway. Harper glanced out the window, thinking of that other terminal, thinking of how the staff who'd treated her like garbage might react if they saw her now inside a private jet that was literally about to skip all the lines and head straight to Vancouver. The contrast was dizzying. A short while after takeoff, Adam unbuckled and moved to sit beside Harper. Carla handed them water, but Harper could already tell something was wrong. Adam's jaw was clenched, eyes locked on his phone. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Legal team's on it," Adam muttered. "They're drafting complaints. I want every person who mistreated you held accountable." She touched his arm. "I appreciate it, but I just want them to change, not a scandal." He gave her a tight smile. "You're too kind, but that's why I can't let this go. You're not the only one they've done this to." When they landed in Vancouver, a sleek car picked them up and whisked them away to a waterfront hotel. The shift was surreal. From a back room in airport detention to a suite overlooking the harbor. Harper felt like she was still holding her breath. That night, over room service, Adam's phone buzzed again. "Eyewitnesses say the staff mocked you," he said. "Called you poor. A scammer." Harper's face fell. Adam reached across the table.
This ends now.
By morning, Adam was on the phone with airport directors demanding answers. He wanted names, apologies, consequences. Later, an official named Ms. Briggs called Harper personally, voice shaky with rehearsed regret. Harper didn't say much. Just one line. "I hope no one else goes through what I did." But Adam wasn't done. He arranged a private meeting with the airport board. Harper joined. She calmly retold everything. The sneers, the isolation, the missed flight. The room went quiet. Adam didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "We own part of this airport. Not anymore. We're pulling everything. And we're going public." Their expressions changed. Suddenly, apologies got real. Policies were promised. Retrainings began. Quiet firings followed. And then, fate struck sweetly. At a small Vancouver bakery, Harper spotted Officer Briggs, alone, off-duty, struggling with a declined credit card at an ATM. The same man who'd mocked her, now red-faced, humiliated in front of strangers. Their eyes met. "You," he muttered. "Yes," she replied, calm. "Me." He tried to explain. Protocol, misunderstanding. She raised a hand. "You treated me like I was dirt. That's on you. I hope you remember it next time." He said nothing more, just disappeared into the crowd. Weeks later, headlines buzzed. A wealthy family pulled millions from a major airport project after a profiling scandal. Officials panicked. Public outrage mounted. Harper didn't speak to the press. She didn't need to. The message had already echoed through every terminal hallway. Don't judge people by appearances. And if you do, pray they don't have a husband like Adam Cook. Like this story? Hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a little justice today, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind the world kindness isn't weakness. See you next time.